what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed. The light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now. Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Live Well, Live Whole podcast series, where we inspire and empower mind, body, spirit, wholeness, happiness, and integration. My name is Marie Moeller, and I'm an author, intuitive, and a host of the Whole Soul Mastery podcast series. And I'm here today with Joel, and I really want to thank you for joining me in this podcast today. I'm so looking forward to having this conversation. Joel and I have emailed back and forth, we connected and just had this deeper, really, it's a familiarity, isn't it? When you connect on a higher level with people, it's kind of a remembering each other in some way. And some of our early contacts and connections, we just felt like there was something, a conversation that wanted to be had. And here we are in this podcast. And I'm so grateful that you joined me today. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored, and yeah, that's definitely the case. When I first came across your works, I was like, I know all this stuff. The stuff she's talking about is like, I mean, literally, I had actually already been receiving really similar info, and through the course of listening to your stuff, I always listen to all your Arcturian stuff. I can't listen to all your stuff because you put out so much stuff. I don't have enough time, but you're so productive. But your Arcturian stuff I always listen to, and it's always, I mean, sometimes there's exact phrasing. It's amazing sometimes how connected that it is, and so because we're all, we're tapped into the same area of total consciousness, obviously. And
right, and it is a gift to be able to recognize that in each other. Is that when you feel that resonance, you just feel that knowing and that familiarity inside ourselves. And so, before we get into our topic and some of the things that we're going to talk about today, what I first wanted to do is invite you to share a little bit about how you found your way onto the path of this kind of language, the awakening journey. We can call it the avatar's journey, the hero's journey, the great awakening. It goes by many names, but it has a similar common core, right? Yeah.
Well, gosh, that could be a very long story if I go back too far, but I will start at the beginning, but I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. If I start rambling, let me know, because I do sometimes do that. But as a young kid, I was highly empathic. My mom's highly empathic, and my dad actually is, I think, in a constant state of channeling, and but they don't realize that so much. They don't understand exactly, have the understanding that I do of what exactly that means. But as a kid, I had a lot of imaginary friends, and at a very young age. And then as I got older, I kind of outgrew that and got really into sports. But I look back now, I was one of those people who'd really get in the zone. And so I was still doing that. And I always had a motor mouth. I was always singing. And I was like, your description in your last, I think it was your last Arcturian debrief was about well, no, it's your post, your analysis, your breakdown. Okay. You were talking about how you were the 1,000-watt bulb, and I was like that as a kid too. I just had so much energy coming out of me that it was just other people that could only take so much of it, basically. And when you're in a constant state of releasing energy, it's not always, for me anyways, I wasn't always so great at letting other people have their space for their energy. I didn't understand that, and I still occasionally struggle with that, but I'd say the last couple of years I've gotten a lot better with that. I was always very good at channeling, but not so good at listening,
Interesting.
And so that's something that I've luckily through this awakening has really improved for me, because I'm starting to see that that's receiving in pretty much the same way, just a different perspective.
Right.
No matter who's talking, they're all channeling the divine, basically.
Right. Exactly.
No matter what you're seeing, play out in front of you. That's the case. So see, I'm already off on a tangent. So anyway, so I grew up, doing a lot of sports, and I got married really young. I jumped into a marriage that I was in for 21 years, but it wasn't fulfilling in a way I needed it to be. And I think it was both sides. But during that time, I was a firefighter. I started at age 21, so I was thrown into this, a lot of darkness really in that world that you're dealing with, that you're healing. And as somebody who's highly empathic, you're drawn to that field, but then also it really beats the heck out of you, And so, and then it's particularly with firefighting in a busy department like I work for, you don't get a lot of sleep. You get a lot of interrupted sleep, and that really messes up your serotonin. And so I would, over many years of this, but with all just, everything that was happening around me, I went from a very happy, upbeat to having depression and anxiety issues. That I think was, there's all kinds of layers of, why and within a cause and effect. But if you just stick with the concept of serotonin, I think my serotonin stuff just got really low. And so I went through, and then I injured my C5-6, and I'm having to have a fusion surgery.
Wow.
And I've injured my lower back as well. And so, and then I was on medication. I was like a lot of
right,
not sleeping, and then the way I was dealing with the stress was by getting buzzed with alcohol pretty much every day on my day off, which is really common for emergency personnel of all kinds, cops and firefighters and nurses, to self-medicate like that, because you're receiving all the energy from all the stuff you're dealing with every day, and it's overloading you, but you don't understand that's what's happening. And so you turn you do what you can to turn the volume knob down on it. So luckily I'd seen other people go through opiate issues, and during that time was kind of the height, right before it shut off, the height of like opiate epidemic, where soccer moms were shooting up and stuff, because they had their OxyContin addictions and all that. So I saw that, and so I didn't really ever let myself take those medications, luckily. But I had friends who did, whose lives got completely destroyed by it. And but so kind of at the height of this, about a year or two after my surgery, maybe it was about 2.5 years ago, I just started having these like panic attacks for no reason. There wasn't anything bad happening. Oh, I also went through my divorce. Sorry, I got out of turn with that. I got divorced. I dated. I ended up getting remarried to somebody who's amazing, who I think has really been I know it's been a really big part of my awakening, because there was that unconditional love there. That's really what the catalyst was for awakening me. But along the way, I started having just like extreme feelings of anxiety. And then when you have anxiety, and depression's a loop of that, because it depletes your receptor sites, and then when your receptor sites are depleted, you're depressed. And that's a lot of what we go through actually in this awakening process too,
right?
Because the higher energy comes in, and it's like, oh boy, it's a lot, it's over, and then you're like, now you're down, and now you got to rest. But it's part of the natural process of that cycle, of here comes the energy, now I'm resting, here comes the energy, I'm resting. But so that's what I just one night I was just having I had this panic attack I've never had before. I've never had anything like that happen. I was hyperventilating, and I went and laid down, and all of a sudden I had this and I didn't know anything about energy or vibrational stuff at all, because I was completely sucked into this firefighter, frat boy world.
Right.
And all of a sudden I just could see in my mind's eye this zigzag that looked like an audio. I did a lot of audio recording as an artist years ago. And so I just saw this audio file just it was coming into my head. And then all of a sudden it was like this conversation was happening that wasn't me. I was just receiving this information.
Wow.
And that just never stopped. And so I got used. So that's pretty much my awakening.
Yeah.
And within that, all of a sudden I started to understand what it meant to be benevolent and heart-centered outside of the context of what other people's expectations of that are. Does that make sense?
It does.
And that's something, as a child, my whole life, my ability to empath and feel other people's feelings, I became a big people pleaser. And because there were two things happening. One, I didn't want anybody else to ever feel in pain, and I somehow felt it was I could fix that. And part of that had to do with my family dynamic at home with my parents.
Right.
But that I was kind of it was kind of my fault that those things might be happening sometimes or whatever. Nothing crazy. My parents are really good people, but that's part of what we all do that as parents, right? What's wrong with you when the kid's acting up?
Right.
But I actually somehow believed deep inside me that I could actually, that if somebody was having issues and feeling bad, I needed to rush around them and accommodate them in a way that would make them feel better. And that's kind of how I lived my life, and kind of why, my marriage went wrong. And because that's not really how it works. It's kind of upside down from how it works, right? It's about,
right. It's in alignment with the matrix. That's in alignment with the upside down matrix, us being upside down too. Then we're a match. But that's the learning process, is you have to go through that to realize, to gain the perspective, to say, is there another way of being here? And when I listen to your story, which is amazing, because that's really the first time I've heard some of your journey, and I know a lot of our listeners can identify with what you just described. And I, we can call it being an empath. We can call it being really sensitive, being a sensitive child or a sensitive person. Empaths, we can be like sponges, and we're picking up on the energy of everyone all around us. But because we're not given this language as children, and that's not in any way taught as part of helping us with our self-understanding and our own personal development, our own, becoming who we are, we don't have that language. And not everybody is experiencing that, because some people are more shut down. Some people are more closed in their heart centers. But empaths, just by the nature of being who we are, we're like wide open. So we're wide open, but we don't have any language for being wide open. The assumption is oftentimes the assumption is that everybody around us is feeling exactly what we're feeling. We don't know any different. And we don't have
they are. Just the volume is a lot lower on it for them. Found through the years, when I talk to people about what it is I have conversations with people about their personal lives, like within the fire department or whatever. But when I word it, they're like, well, yeah, I think that's it. Like, it's like they don't get it until you explain it to them. And then once you explain it to them, they're like, oh, what you're saying is correct. I just
don't have the language, right? And when we don't have the language, we also are so oftentimes disempowered, and that causes stress and overwhelm, and we reach for things to feel better because we're naturally resilient, creative beings. And the inner creator, even if the conscious creator, the part of us that has our awareness and is moving through our life, even if it doesn't know what we're doing, but there's a drive to reset, to reorient, to be resilient. And it finds its way. It finds its way. If it's self-medicating with alcohol, then it's going to do that to help us in the journey until we learn better skills and we learn the language of what's more true really about us and what our gifts really are here for. Well,
and as we awaken, it's great that you brought that up, because it's part of this concept that a lot of people call the perfect path, which is like, hey, I'm on my perfect path, no matter how much it doesn't seem like it at times, based on what my expectations are, based on this upside down concept of how things are supposed to work. But when we first awaken, we end up kind of in spiritual ego, which is, and most of us are still stuck in that to a certain extent. Very few people, I think, are out of spiritual ego. And what I mean by that is there's these feelings of you're intuiting what your kind of future is. You're intuiting the light codes that are coming in, the new ones, and you're not there yet, right? So you're there in that moment as it arrives, but now all of a sudden you're back and you're like, oh no, I'm not doing the thing I thought I was. But the other thing that we're doing in those moments is we're going, hey, this other person's not doing that thing I just got info on. What the heck? And then now you're like, so it's part of how the ego, runs around it.
Right.
And so, and that's part of duality, part of, just like the other day when that conversation got into like, well, this is how it's supposed to be. Well, this is how it's supposed to be. Well, that's spiritual ego. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, because it is for sure part of the process that we're supposed to experience it. It's
Right.
there for the experience. It's part of the divine design so that we will experience that.
Right.
And as we awaken more and more, and then you start being able to see it, then you can kind of go, oh, okay, now I get it. And then when it's happening, you start when you start realizing, hey, that's part of the perfect plan and part of the design, then you can kind of more easier and easier let go of it and recognize it, that the judgment that you felt in that second or whatever as divine also, and then that really starts releasing it in a hurry. And that's when it starts really peeling off.
Right. It is. I can say that a lot of people don't know how to access this, and maybe that's something else. I mean, we have lots of things we can talk about. It's so exciting because we're in the realm of quantum now. So there's like infinite possibilities. But how we access and actually live the energy of the witness observer, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, we've been living a lot of concepts. When people at least step their first little pinky toes into what we could call the perfect path or the hero's journey or whatever we want to call it, but we start awakening to something more. When
Yeah.
we just first enter that journey, we start learning a language and we start learning about concepts and things, and it oftentimes can be conceptual for a little while until it becomes more of a practice and a lived experience, until it becomes
Yeah.
you, right? So
Yeah, it's like a state of being. It's like moving from doing to being, basically,
right, moving
right?
from doing
Which is also part of being the moving to that witness observer perspective, is moving from doing to being. But
right.
we're in this, within this consciousness that we're in now, we're in a seesaw of that. I don't know. I have never met anybody in person. I'm sure there are people out there who's in a state of witness observer perspective all the time. But then how would you know? Because
Right.
it's not like because when your ego's gone that much, it's not like they need to tell anybody about it. so,
Correct. They're just
so
that essence, right? They've just
yeah,
become one
yeah,
with source, and that's like being in the world but not of it. That's what the witness observer really, that's a mastery of being in this world but not being of it, so not being yanked around. We don't animate and react to all the things. We're in a state of divine union. I think that's also a part of being the being the witness observer and living that in our lives. But
yeah.
hearing about that, and anybody who's bouncing in and hears our podcast maybe for the first time, they say, yeah, I really want to know how to do that. Like, I really want to know how to be that. It is a practice. It's something that you do cultivate over time. It's like a new vibrational habit. That's the way I understand it. It became
Well,
a new vibrational habit in my life, and I think it did in yours.
that is true, and that is one perspective. But from a witness to observer perspective, it's kind of not. It's kind of happening automatically because you're just over there witnessing it.
Right.
So that's part of the seesaw. We go back to like, oh, I have this practice that I'm doing in
Right.
order to create this witness observer. So that's part of the seesaw. And the more that unravels, the more you start to realize that the doing part's more part of the just the matrix,
The
the
illusion,
lower, the
right? The
illusion.
illusion.
But it's part of the illusion that we're supposed. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not any less than.
Right.
It's just where we are in our journey now, and it's why this journey, we as creator or co-creative higher beings, or whatever your perception of it, how that works is, it's the reason that we're here is to experience that. That's
Yes.
the point.
Yes.
But then, this is just one of the many parts of their journey. It's not like
Oh,
we kind of, I think as light workers who are very focused on, the emancipation of the planet Earth,
mm,
we lose sight into thinking that that's like the finish line
mm.
somehow. But it's not. It's just one experience along the way.
I think it is a journey of discovery. It's not, I guess I wasn't saying that we are creating the witness observer. We're actually peeling back the layers of what we're not, so that what we truly are is the awareness, is the
Yeah,
source energy that's present. And I think that's what we're in whatever, in the emancipation of the planet, in the awakening journey that many of us are engaging right now. And more are being summoned and invited and activating in this experience too. We are learning this language of the witness observer. Some people are learning more about the empathic nature we have. That's what makes, part of what makes us human, and part of what makes us divine is our ability to connect with each other. And there is something in that. I just wanted to say that one more time in this podcast, is that there are a lot of empaths that until we learn some of this language, that in and of itself is overwhelming. And sometimes being an empath and being, kind of being a sponge for all the energies around us can cause us to shut down, or the self-medicating, or those things, until we learn that it's a gift, right? It's that in that
Well,
upside down world, it's a gift that seems sometimes it's something challenging to manage. Or maybe we were like that, I don't know, the challenging child in our family. Or I think there's a lot of kids in classrooms today that are really sensitive, and it's hard to sit still all day, and they can't move that energy, and they're picking up the energy of everyone around them. And
yeah,
yet,
it's one of my daughters is like that. Yeah, it was like that. Yeah.
right, and
Yeah.
they're just, we don't, our world and the structures and the systems that are currently in place from the old 3D matrix isn't supporting that energy of flow and movement and having time out in nature in the day. And nope, they're in classrooms normally without COVID, at a desk, and having to be cerebral most of the day, all day, every day. In these conversations, it's bringing back a sense of valuing that empath inside us, and that guidance system, that GPS system, and the higher sensory abilities that we have, that they're actually purposeful. And
Yeah.
you've been uncovering your gifts in this way, and it's amazing to see that transformation in yourself. Like, I'm sure you feel that more, you understand yourself a lot better.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, it's interesting because I'm sure that probably part of what you've been getting the last week or two is a lot of this witness observer stuff, because I've just been getting pummeled with it, and then kind of really experiencing it at times significantly.
So like, this is all relevant, and this is what I really feel in the podcast that we do. I also, in my nonprofit Whole Soul School and Foundation, we believe the conversation is the education, and our world is going to come around to energies like that. That it's not drilling down memorization of formulas, and it's not, all that information is going to become available. It already is, essentially, with the internet,
Yeah.
right? It's this energy we can portal into when we need to know these things. And otherwise, we're designed to be lighter, freer, and not saddled with all those have tos and all of that denser material, unless it's part of our specific path and service and purpose to be somebody who can call up, formulas and just heavier things that have structured many of our lives, and people's lives who have been through school, who've been through the system, right? And the system of going on maybe to college and getting degrees and all these things. It actually takes us away from the witness observer, because we identify more with the outer world and its rewards. And then that empath gets shut down, and we succeed if we rise into, performing and all of these things. And there comes a point, it's either an injury, or life is overwhelming, or maybe a relationship dissolving. There's all kinds of ways that we can be summoned to the path of change and the path of greater awareness. And I think the witness observer activates in that journey somewhere, because it's always been inside us,
Yeah.
right? It's
Well,
always been.
yeah. Well, that's where I'm glad you came back to that. So if you look at it conceptually, as the witness observer is the silence that's in the center. It's the, if you I don't know if you, just to give just basic particle theory, which I don't understand, by the way, but I'm going to give you some.
Oh, I could never describe it.
So if you picture a negative ion, and you understand a positive ion, right? And they don't connect to each other, they don't touch. Well, if you think of the creator consciousness as the stillness, as the nothingness, 0 point. That's all. It's all that.
Right.
And so this ion that's spinning around is creation. It's energy in form. And so anytime you're perceiving anything, you have to be in the witness observer perspective or it couldn't exist. And so you're always in the witness observer perspective. You're just awakening to realize it. Does that make sense?
Well, that's beautiful. I've never thought about it that way or felt it that way.
Yeah. So what happens to me a lot of times is something will happen, and I've now that I've reached this kind of understanding is that anything that happens where I'm not in witness, where I don't perceive being a witness observer, but I'll look back on whatever it was, and then I'm seeing it from anything I look at in the past. I'm looking at it from a witness observer standpoint, and there's something interesting in that, and that is that anything that's in spin, which is all of creation. I don't know if you've looked into, I mean, we can go through that stuff, the energetic part, but basically all of creation is energy and spin. And it's what creates all the, the spiral and the vibration and all that, that's energy and spin. Well, anything at spin from 0 point perspective is sort of in the past. And so you're really, I know this is really deep stuff, but it's not exactly what it is. It's just the best way to describe it from a three-dimensional perspective. So when you're a witness observer, you're kind of witnessing the avatar as from what it's already done.
Right.
And so when you start perceiving it that way, it starts really helping you let go of the stuff where you're like, man, I messed that up, or I should have, where you start doing shoulda, woulda, coulda, you start realizing, no, there is no shoulda, woulda, coulda. There's only what is, and what is was the divine perfection of what happened. Even though I didn't like it, and I still kind of don't like it, whatever I did or somebody else did or whatever happened in our lives, it's still not, from a witness perspective standpoint, you're really just witnessing it occurring. Does that make sense?
It does. And there's almost a feeling to me, if I could say this, that the way you're describing it is that in the witnessing, we have the energy of the God presence, but that's often when the ego kind of move over, buddy. I'm going to help out here. And, that can take us into that place.
But ego, really, the way I look at ego, there's two ways to look at ego. So when we're in upside down bill down here, you can look at ego as maybe malevolence or you can look at it as your nervous system that's overstimulated, that you're in fight or flight.
Right.
But once you ascend past that, where your nervous system's intact, there's still an ego within, and it's upside downness. Now your ego is benevolence. It's the desire to. There's still a desire that exists due to this construct of space-time, where if you're ever perceiving anything at that level, that's your alignment now. Does that make sense? So it's still, but that's still
are you saying that the ego and that basically stillness or sacred presence, that divine presence, kind of unify as one and become?
Well, yeah, that's what integration is.
Right.
I mean, that's what integration is the ego is reached a certain energetic level where it can no longer function malevolently, and it's flipped the other way, and now it's only functioning benevolently.
And that's the service to self, flip the switch to service to others in the whole.
Yeah, but it's service, but it becomes much more than service to others, because all others are also you.
Well, exactly.
So and that's part of all of it. That's part of all, it's so many moving parts that are all, like you'd like to say, timelines that are aligning within oneness. A lot of times when I receive information, it'll be cyclical, as like, hey, this is causing this, or this is causing this, or they're causing each other. And I call it, there's a joke that's always running. It's the chicken or the egg. It's the universal chicken or the egg. But because really at the point at which it becomes chicken or the egg, it's actually a timeline aligning for you.
Those are nice. Right? When things come into alignment. Yes.
Well, yeah, because I don't know for you, for some of the stuff that I am thinking about that involves all these higher concepts of quantum stuff that, like I said, I don't have any background in at all. So it's like, what is this? I don't know what this is. Sometimes I'll look it up and I go, oh yeah, that's exactly how I just got it. Like, okay. But because it comes in ways that are cyclical, as Well, the cyclical part is sort of like, it's like the spinning thing that's just about to go boink and then line up as one thing. And so it comes in and I'm like, you can't get there from here. This is just, it doesn't make sense. And then all of a sudden you go to sleep, or like an hour later, you're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense now. It's almost like it's a simplification, because it's like all these, when you start aligning cause and effect really more in just, it's happening simultaneously. It's just two sides of the same coin that are actually one, versus two things that are causing each other, which is what duality is, right? Which is what the fight of good and bad is it's the tug of war. That when they get like this, then they just kind of cease, they just become one.
Well, can I ask you a question? Because your perspective and your understandings is very illuminating for me, and giving me more pieces of the language or the bigger story of what's going on, the bigger picture. And so what I'd like to really focus on, because I think a lot of people have this question, and a lot of us are at this point in the journey when we're aware of the duality. We know the duality. We know the game that's playing out inside us.
Yeah.
We are part of that creation of the duality, right? We're a participant and a creator. But take it to the individual level, and people are feeling the duality, and they're not feeling this is nice and smooth what I'm doing. Oftentimes they're really clashing, or it's very stressful. And so when you have people aware that they have, say, this pattern in their life that's coming more from their ego, they know it, they see it, they get it, and yet it's still running. And then they have this higher presence inside them, this deeper soul presence that we could call the stillness, the awareness, the divine essence, the God spark. There's an infinite amount of names. That's the God in us, right? How do you feel as that coming into the oneness, into one, the two sides of the same coin? What helps in your experience, if you could share just what you think that coming into the one is? Is it relaxing more and more into the witness observer, which is a process unto itself? What is that?
Well, it's a cycle that you can't really say it's one thing or the other, because from an energy standpoint and a body standpoint, it's an energetic overload that basically causes you to go and hit the reset button.
Right.
Remember, we were talking about the reset button the other day.
Exactly.
And I've been getting stuff on the reset button recently. So, and part of it is, so I don't know if you pay much attention to ancient civilization history stuff at all.
Some.
I kind of like it. I don't pay really close attention or like read about everything. Every once in a while I'll watch a show on it. But within all these paintings and carvings and like the paintings even from the Renaissance era, where they're kind of trying to hide a lot of this stuff in there, there's always some form of a rod or a staff and a stone, or could be the pine cone or the stone that's sitting on the staff. Right. And then often there's the dove. And so for a while I've known that the staff represents your spine. It represents the chakra system.
Right.
And the stone represents the pineal gland. So it's when all that stuff's in alignment, your pineal gland activates when the whole rod is illuminated. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I finally realized what the dove was. It's often referred to as the Holy Spirit, but it also represents this area of your throat where if you were to look at a cutout of it, it looks just like a dove. If you were to like look at cutout of your, and what sits in there is your vagal nerve. Your vagal nerve is the thing that causes you to pass out when you bear down. But it also is the thing that when you breathe, when you consciously breathe, it's stimulated and it soothes your nervous system. So whether you're hyperventilating or whether you just like something crazy happened, for me, like when I do yoga, a lot of times I'll stand up and I'll do this arch back, and all of a sudden I'll just see geometric shapes will come. Like I just get this blasted energy. And so I've been going for a long time. I've been going, okay, well, eventually it'll come to me what this is. And it's always, it's like everything else. It's never like, oh, that's the answer. It's just more info later, right? It never gives you there's no finish line for any of it. But that was my kind of realization about the dove, is this incorporation of the vagal nerve. in our body. And I've been getting stuff on on that for a couple of years, but it's cycling back now. And so what happens is when we're in this, we're constantly going through, as we awaken, we're going through an energetic overload that causes, in some way, we stimulate this thing, whether it's with conscious breathing. So that's the cool thing. If you're doing your conscious breathing on a regular basis, you're just keeping it stimulated at a certain level where you're not feeling that overwhelm, because the overwhelm is your nervous system going, your nervous system and your ego also, which are they're the same, basically, they're the same thing, going into fight or flight, because it's your body's changing with this higher energy coming in, and your ego and your body are going, where's the threat? I'm in fight or flight, so where is the threat? And here's the crazy thing, is that's what's happening to everyone, but the ego will find a threat outside itself that's not really even a threat. Does that make sense? So it's like, oh my God, like it happens like this, or sometimes your trigger is what, there's your background stuff that triggers you is what causes it, maybe, but that's just energy too, in form. So, so what's really the higher truth is that this energy comes in, it overwhelms your nervous system, and your ego and your nervous system go, okay, where's the threat? Because I have to survive, because that's how I'm designed. And it goes, oh, this guy that keeps clearing his throat is irritating me. That's the problem, or whatever. It's, these days, it's not that. Most stuff is not life threatening, but your body is reacting as if it was. And guess what? That's what causes rapid evolution, physical evolution in everything. The threat of death, the perceived threat of death, is what creates evolution in every animal and plant and everything.
And that's the benevolent aspect then of the ego, that in its own way is trying to help us evolve to get back, to allow unity consciousness, even to its own potential disappearance eventually.
Well, yeah.
Or
that's what the ego is.
Right.
I mean, we perceive it as this thing that's causing us problems, but it's not. It's the thing that's evolving us.
That's an amazing perspective. That's an amazing
when you start looking at it that way, all of a sudden you're not fighting your ego anymore, and then it can just release.
And that might be, in a way, the answer to the question I was asking with the two sides of the same coin, because when we're not wrestling the ego, because we think, first we think the bad guy's out there. Then we learn about the ego and we think it's in here.
And
right?
that's spiritual ego. The second one. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but it's good. Then we take that on. I mean, there's many phases to the journey, right? As we unfold and as we let go of the things that we're not, en route to who we really more truly are, which is this sacred, amazing, pristine, divine essence that is beingness, that is awareness, that is the essence of light, consciousness. But that was really helpful, because in the journey, and that's, I've never heard it said that way, Joel, so I'm really learning something exquisite from you, is that it is sort of the mentor, a catalyzer at times, but a catalyzer and mentor of our own expansion and our own soul growth process. Without it, we might not be growing, especially in a realm like this.
And the way that we perceive it in the ego currently within the lower chakras, or the third dimension, or however you want to call it, whatever you want to call that, is that it's really unconscious, though. Ego is unconsciousness at that level, and once it becomes conscious, that's when it's reached higher energy, and that's when it becomes this benevolent alignment. And so so the ego doesn't know that it's the ego; it thinks it's you.
Right. No,
does that make sense? And when you're in lower consciousness, you think you're it too. It's like
it's identity. It's your identity.
Yeah.
But and then do you distinguish between that, and you do call something the spiritual ego? Is that the good ego then, or is that another tier in the?
Well, spiritual. That's not a term that I coined. I got that from somewhere else. It's just a way of describing when you awaken and you suddenly realize that you're going through changes, and then the ego becomes the bad guy that you're fighting against. That's more spiritual ego. Or you're fighting against, you're wanting other people's egos to change somehow. Like so So it's sort of what judgment is in the self and in the other self, is
Yes.
recognition of the ego and not loving and accepting it, or not appreciating it.
Right.
So when you
Well,
start
I
getting an
already felt my
appreciation of the
whole
ego,
body relax when you were talking about the ego in that way, of that in its own way, it's a lot of things rolled into one, but I was just feeling not only is it a catalyst, but it's also an escort and it's a mentor,
yeah,
it's identity, it's all these things, but we do evolve, and when we can befriend it, when we realize that it is what's evolving us, I liked that. That was really, and there's many perspectives on what the ego is from many different people. This is just one perspective on what this could be
yeah.
for people. And I've always, I don't know if it was Wayne Dyer, but I remember him being the one that ego stands for edging God out, right? Have you ever heard of that? Yeah.
No, I have never heard that.
Oh yeah.
I'm not
Edging
as
God.
tapped into all these people as you are. I'm a newbie.
Oh, that's okay. Well, but I felt a resonance with that at some point in the journey. We understand that
Yeah,
because when we were, identifying ourselves as identity in a 3D matrix, and the ego's at the helm of running that show,
yeah,
and thinks and is pretty unconscious and just thinks it is all that is, right? It has
yeah.
that perception.
Mhm.
When
Well,
we do awaken, yeah,
it's also in a state of wanting things to stay the same, which is not possible. So
right.
I mean, that's where a lot of suffering comes from within ourselves. Is that the ego wants things as they are, and it's very clever about the way in which it will fight to keep
Oh,
things as they are, and it'll get you to do all kinds of stuff
oh
that's
yeah.
not that's not that's not good for you.
Right.
And
Well,
and
and it wants to maintain what it's set up for
yeah,
you. So,
but guess what though? What I've come to realize is that I used to see that as, oh, tricky little ego, man, I got to fight against this thing. Well, some of it's tough to decipher what's what, right? Because you're still thinking in cause and effect in this way. And that's that. Sometimes though, that thing the ego wants you to do is what you actually need to do to recover and rest from the physical upgrade that you just got, from the fight or flight and the evolution that your body's going through. And so it kind of actually, there's a lot of wisdom in the ego too. And so a lot of times we feel like people feel, blocked. And I've had a lot of this because my journey's been so rapid.
Mm.
And that's that you get this overwhelmed ego, and now you're just like kind of laid out. You're tired and you need to rest, but you're thinking, oh man, I need to get myself up and go do some yoga and do all the things that'll make me feel better. Well, yeah, that's true when it happens, when you get to it. But until you do, you're actually are still in that perfect path. So when you look back on it and go, man, I should have done this and I should have done that. No, that's lower thinking. I mean, if you're thinking that way, I'm not judging anyone for thinking that way. But when we start being able to look back at it and go, no, the ego actually was right. It had to be, because it's the perfect path. So in that context, does that make sense?
Yeah.
But there is this tug of war, because you're still thinking, well, I still have choice, and I still have to make the right decision. But whatever decision you make is the right decision. So that's, now we're in that spinning cause and effect thing where there's an alignment coming.
Right, exactly. I like that. I love that each time you're
Yeah.
in the spinning, there is alignment is coming. Alignment is summoning us.
So it's almost, you can almost think of it as like you're in the whirlpool. That's the vortex, right?
Right.
And that the closer you get down to where it's about to be kind of more towards 0 point, where it's more of not vibration, not wide, it's like higher vibration. When you spin down into that, so you're spinning and you're like going, oh, it's cause and effect. What's causing this? What's causing this? It doesn't make any sense. And then all of a sudden you hit that spot where it aligns.
Right. It's a sweet spot. I've
It's the sweet spot.
experienced it, right? It is a
Yeah,
sweet spot.
I'm sure you experience it constantly.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also though, we learn in the journey, we do learn to appreciate the friction, the challenges, the things that are cultivating the growth and the alignment that is coming.
Yeah, I mean, that's the journey that we came here to have. But we're just evolving out of that old journey now. That's all. Everybody is evolving out of it, just not everybody's in awareness that they're evolving out of it.
Right. Correct.
And not everybody's on the same timeline where they're actually evolving out of it anytime soon, like within their current perceived lifetime.
Right.
And
No, exactly.
and that's something that takes this higher awareness too, in order to like kind of manage all this in a way where it's like it's all goodness, is to be able to perceive it. It's part of it has to do with losing your fear of death by understanding that we're actually immortal, that we go, that all this stuff goes on forever, and that this is just the training wheels area. And so when you end up in that level of faith where you understand that that is true, then you start really being able to see other people's journeys where they're in difficulty as something that you can accept as and heal as a release, but not necessarily in a way where you can fix it like right now. And that's the difficulty with being an empath, because you really want it to go, well, if I can't fix it right now, then things are horrible. Like,
right.
that person's suffering over there, and I can't make it go away. It's like, this is awful. And so in our lower journeys, and we, well, especially in the spiritual ego portion, you run away from that stuff. You get your distance from it. You go in the cave. You get the corona going, where everybody's gotta activate their crown chakra by going in the cave and getting away from everybody. And so it's not always by choice. In fact, a lot of times it's not. But once you are awakened initially, I think almost everybody, unless they had some like near-death experience where it all tore off at once, or complete death to come back experience, then you're going to go through that spiritual ego thing where you're like, okay, I have to, in order to feel good, I got to juggle a lot of stuff in a very specific way. I got to have my crystal, this crystal over here, and I got to have my stuff I'm rubbing on, like my
oils,
frankincense and myrrh. And not that stuff is helpful too, by the way, I think. But
these are all tools that we do, regain.
But eventually none of that stuff's necessary. Just we're not there yet.
That's the spiritual scaffolding. I mean, that would be my language. That's all part of the spiritual scaffolding that's building the bridge. It's getting us from, not that they're linear destinations from like A to B, but it's supporting us and holding us. That's like spirit and source and all that great cosmic energy, helping us to not run and to acquire and cultivate some of these skills. And discernment kept coming up also when you were talking about, at that stage in the journey, and you have this gap and this chasm between who you were and how you were perceiving and who you're becoming. Discernment is some critical boards in the bridge. There's some critical stones in the fog that help us make those leaps and feel safe to make the leap, at least to the next stone, at least to the next point in the path.
Well, and that's the interesting thing that I've experienced, is that the stones in the path thing's always been coming to me. And I used to actually run on these rocks on a jetty in the ocean, and I was just in constant awareness of like, this is representing these stones that I'm leaping from. Yes. And I could sprint with like out thinking across these stones, like, and it didn't make any sense that it was happening. Like, I don't know if I could do it now, but at the time I was just like, I'm sprinting across these stones with these gaps, and like, if I slip at all, I'll hurt myself. But I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna run across them. But anyway, so that's a whole other thing. But the stones, though, the thing that's interesting about the stones is that, and this is part of that scaffolding, and I like that description better than spiritual ego. I like that.
Yeah, spiritual scaffolding.
I like that. So your spiritual scaffolding, or maybe even just look at it as the stones too. It's just kind of the same thing. So, but as you go from one step on your scaffolding, or one stone to the next stone, a lot of times through this process, it requires totally letting go of all the stones behind you.
Yes.
And so when you start getting into, especially sixth density consciousness, which is a higher level of this witness observer, there is this, I have to let go of the idea that I'm controlling everything. So there's this lower idea that's really based more in ego, that if you are, but it's still great, because it's still like, it's a stepping stone. So It's still wonderful, but it's not really what's happening. It's a little bit, I want to say delusional, because it's not really the best word, but it's one perspective of reality that's still it's still kind of down here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's this idea that you can, if you just want something bad enough, like, I want this new car, you're going to manifest it. Well, that may or may not be what happens, but it won't have anything to do with that because the ego can't manifest desires. It doesn't work like that. So
Mm.
it has to happen from these higher energetic level. That's the
Okay.
collective consciousness level. So
Right.
the thing that at this level that we can lean towards manifesting is this, peace, love, joy for everybody. Like this
Yes.
changing, this general changing of our society and planet Earth, and that's really happening anyway.
Right.
So at that point, it becomes more like, okay, I am grateful for the future thing that's already happening.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Right. No, it does.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And that's kind of more, if you want to get, I guess, if you want to get into the understanding of co-creation. And I don't fully, a lot of this is just coming out of, I don't have a, this is not an area of my life that I live in. I don't live in a state of co-creation. Like it's in my perception, I can tell you that. But it really is about that. I saw a film once that showed these guys that were doing healing, were breaking up some cancer and just making it disappear. It was somewhere in the East, and they're speaking a different language, but they're saying already healed, already healed,
Yes.
already healed. And so they're in tune with that concept of
Right.
being able to, and it's kind of some of the stuff that these Arcturians talk about in your transmissions, where it's like you're connecting to a future timeline.
Right.
So all possibilities are hanging out there,
Right.
and through zero point, through becoming this witness observer, you're able to connect to that. And that's really what co-creation is. But I don't know that there's too many humans on the planet Earth that are actually manifesting material objects with
I
that
think
skill
we
yet.
are. I
Yeah.
think we are. But whether or not we know that we're consciously doing that, or
Yeah.
I think just like you said, how you jumped across those rocks, there was
Yeah.
something inside you that was like a larger than life presence inside you. That was like a divinity, and you became like air. Right. And I think there are
Yeah.
times that whether we're angry as a creator and we're an unconscious creator, but we're angry and creating, I think things do manifest where things that we don't even want. I do think that there's this higher level of creation, but I think that we grow into being able to be a conscious partner of what all that is, which I think is also what you're saying.
Well, yeah, it is. Well, what I'm saying is that you can't say there's a delineated line because it's not how any of that stuff works. But there's perceiving that you're co-creating within ego, and there's perceiving that you're co-creating from a collective energy.
Yes.
And those
Right.
two things are not the same. And
Okay.
so a lot of people, there is uh, a lot of people that operate in this area of like, I'm going to create material stuff that I want for myself,
Right.
that's going to make me rich or whatever.
Right.
Like I said, maybe they're going to perceive that, but just because you go around doing that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen for you. Maybe it will and maybe it won't. But obviously that's not the end game here. The end game here isn't for us to just get stuff for ourselves. I don't think that's not how I.
Right, right. Well, I think we're learning this whole thing is a journey into conscious creation and
Yeah.
really at some level co-creation
Yeah.
and becoming this awareness and all of those things. That is part of that spiritual scaffolding that we learn that
Yeah.
we are these conscious creators and we set about, oh, well, let me practice with that. But I think we become vibrational creators. And I think that's really
Yeah.
ultimately also some of what I hear you describing is that if you're just manifesting a thing, a
Yeah.
coveting, a wanting,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
That's also very different than becoming the essence, becoming that which you seek. And that's a different
For
journey.
sure. Oh
When
yeah, no, that's collective thought.
that is
That's
more
more of
collective, right? That's the
yeah,
language,
yeah,
right? Is the
yeah.
collective thought.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. You're saying it better than me because I don't have any experience with it. It's a long
I've
time doing
experienced this many times, and there's two things that I want to seed in this conversation, and then I'll have to have you back because we have so many things to talk about. But
it.
one thing I wanted to say, in alignment with that gratitude and that appreciation, which is part of what it becomes the vibrational creation, which is what we're talking about, becoming the energy of that which you seek to become or seek to experience or seek to have. There was an author, I think his name was Charles Roth, and he wrote a book called Mind, the Master Power. And I think he might have been a unity or a Unitarian minister or something like that. But in his book, this always stood out for me. It was a quote that he said, Gratitude is seeing the flower in the seed. Gratitude is seeing the flower in the seed. So it's appreciating already what already is and is
Yeah,
yet
that's
to
exactly
become.
and that's exactly what those people were doing that I was describing that were doing that
Yes, already
instantaneous
healed.
healing.
Already
Yeah.
healed,
So
already healed.
and
The knowing of that and the doing of that is what we started with today, is that's the journey. Is the vibrational becoming, is the vibrational
well,
allowing of
and
that.
I think part of our co-creation as light workers for a lot of us is that that's what we're doing with the new earth.
Yes.
And it really it seems like, you know, wordsmithing or reframing in terms of going, oh, I'm just going to say, but that's not what it is, because you actually do know that that's what's going to happen, and
Yes.
that's what really creates it. Is that and that comes from and that part is really something that comes automatically, I think. I mean, you
Yes.
can practice it and sense it and have the sense that you're practicing it. It's the fake it till you make it, but that's just intuition about what's already going to happen.
Right.
Does that make sense?
But for
So
some
when you're
people, they need those steps. Like some
oh, everybody
people, I
does.
was one of those people
We all
for
do, I think.
sure that
No, we
like,
all do. Yeah,
yeah, you
we
know,
all do. It's just once you get past it, you can look back at it and go, oh, all this stuff that I was forcing myself to do, I really wasn't. That was intuition about what was always going to happen.
right. And that was also part of the spiritual scaffolding that helped you get to that place so that you could
Yes.
even look back and see, oh, I
Yeah.
was already doing it. It was already, I was already on that timeline. This is
Yeah.
just how I manifested those stones in the fog for myself. That's how I experienced the creations I was making to be here
Yeah.
now, to be here
Yeah.
now.
And well, in some of the things we do, it does feel like uncomfortably forcing it sometimes, but that's never what it is. That's your nervous system being overstimulated.
Yeah.
But it just seems like that in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me just of a song by Janet Stanfield, who she sings a lot of wonderful songs about this journey, but she sings a song about I'm waiting for my happiness. And in the song there, it's very funny. It's kind of a song about manifesting when you begin that portion of the journey of becoming a conscious creator and maybe feeling like you're pushing the river sometimes. And her whole point is, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and I'm waiting for my happiness, and what I'm trying to manifest hasn't come, and I don't have all day, and it's almost lunchtime, and when's it going to happen? And it's a great song because we all, any one of us who's experienced any of this, it's not a goal, it is a desire or something that we are practicing at some level, some new skills. That's that point of the journey. It's very fun. I found, and I still do that because in our journey we go spirally, we go deeper and broader and wider on the
Mm-hmm.
story arc of the lives that we're living, and
While also zooming in,
while also
right?
zooming in and
Yeah.
getting more and more aligned. And I think we can do
Mm-hmm.
that to an infinite level because this is an infinite creation, really.
It's a fractal, and that's
Yeah.
what happens. I mean, if you've ever looked at a fractal in motion, like a video of it, but that's
Yeah.
pretty much what happened. It's zooming in and zooming out all at the same time.
Right. Exactly.
But
That's us.
but really, what it is it's actually just you in one spot with it moving around you in a way that's creating that illusion. That's what the real work. That's what the higher witness observer perspective is. Is it's all coming to you. It's
And-
within that Merkaba that's creating that illusion
Right.
of the
Right.
through spin. It's that spiral. It's like you ever see the old movies where they're like, hey, we're going back in time, and it's just the spinny spiral that looks like you're moving into it.
Right.
That's what all of reality is.
Right.
It really is. It's just this spinning, and that's why you see that spiral everywhere in the
Right.
ancient civilizations, is
Well,
because
it's
there
in
you go.
this, right there.
Well, it's in the design of everything, because it's the by
Fibonacci sequence, is it?
yeah, Fibonacci, exactly. There you go. Fibonacci. There's a lot of different names for it, but I think the math and science guys call it phi. It's the
Oh,
1.618 ratio.
oh,
That really is kind of like one 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals
right.
5, 3 plus 5
Exactly.
equals 8. It's the double. And that's the vortex math too. The doubling vortex math.
Right. Right.
So it's all the same thing. It's all created by the design of the spiral It's kind of like you're just staring at this moving spiral and it's fooling you into thinking you're actually in there doing stuff. But you're just the creator of that spiral who's witnessing it, because you are ultimately the negative ion that can't actually be touched by the positive ion.
Right. At a feeling level, because that's where I go. For me, it's both. It's all of that. It's the positive and negative, and it's
Yeah.
the
Oh, it is.
inner and outer. And for me, the experience of that is when we do find ourselves in that place of alignment, or when we're in that place of consciously summoning something in. I mean, that's what creator, source, God,
Yeah.
the great mystery, whatever you want to call that, is in absolute bliss at creation, because
Right.
it's happening millions and billions of infinite amount of time, and it's only expanding the light and the consciousness that it already is, right? And
Yeah,
we're all
exactly. Well,
part of that.
it's getting to know itself, because
It's getting to know itself.
without something outside of itself, it doesn't know what it is.
Right. Right.
It's the theory of relativity.
Right.
It's all about all of creation, all energetic portals that we take on and receive and all that are all just infinite additions to our collective perspective.
Wow.
And it's interesting that some of these things that I'm saying, hey, this is how it is, this is how it is. It's really not true. That's just one macro perspective, but they're all occurring simultaneously.
Right.
They're all occurring simultaneously. So that's just kind of I'm just giving you my perspective as it's coming out in the moment,
Right.
or maybe the perspective of whatever energy is coming through, but it's all occurring simultaneously.
Yeah.
So all these, and that's what actually creates the quantum field itself, is these infinite perspectives.
Right.
So the portals themselves are, in terms of the way we process them as human beings, are perspective. That's kind of what they are. So at least it's one aspect of it.
It's one aspect of it. The conversation is so rich, and this our souls do, we do crave these kinds of explorations, these discoveries, the soul discovering itself. I think in one of my earliest books that I wrote a while back now, is that the soul seeks expansion. I mean, that's what it's here for. That's what we crave. That's what creator desires in these infinite perspectives too. These
right, and so we're exactly, and that's the game. That's what we created for ourselves, is so that and that's what makes us immortal, is that this is an infinite fractal, and the creation never stops. There's no end point to it. It's always expanding forever, because that's how a fractal works. You can't get to the end of it. And so, but at the same time, we're zooming out, right? Which is the return, which is that we're receiving the whole fractal larger and larger and larger, in a way where so there's a simultaneous expansion and return that is actually mathematically just like it's converse is the word.
Yes.
Converse. And I just got shown a pair of Converse with a star on the side.
Right.
Converse.
Spirit's awesome, right? Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, it's not kind of like, it is just in the way everything else is. It's just two sides of one coin.
Two sides of one coin. I can't tell you the number of times that message has come to me in my journey, that two sides of one coin, and we're the coin. Like, we're that all of us are.
Correct. And that coin is that vortex torus complex, really, in terms of like a way it's structured.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll have to talk about that at a different time.
This is fantastic. And I know this seeds a lot of other conversations, and we'll definitely do this again. And I'm so grateful to hear your story, and to just be able to stream in this, the deepening of understanding, because that's what souls want. We do crave seeking to know ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper still. So I really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Your messages, and we'll do it again. And I just want to thank our listeners for joining us in this conversation. And people can find more information about Whole Soul Mastery at wholesoulmastery.com. I am in the process of rebuilding that website and combining Frequency Writer. And so there's an expansion coming with that. But I would invite people to go to wholesoulmastery.com and sign up to be on the list to receive future notifications about inspirations happening and to come. And you can find this video and other podcasts to inspire you and to elevate you in your journey at Whole Soul Mastery on YouTube and other social media platforms. And if you like, you can also listen to us through platforms like Spotify and Apple iTunes and things like that. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And until next time, we send you blessings in your journey, and we'll see you soon. Blessings.